Good evening, everyone. This is our second budget presentation. We are working through a process within our district to develop the proposed budget for next school year, the 2022-23 school budget. We anticipate that process after this evening, and we've received feedback from our board, will continue through our next board meeting, at which we will present what we believe to be the recommended budget for the board to adopt. Tonight, we're going to extend our presentation from the last time to talk a little bit more about how the budget supports the academic success of our students, the co-curricular success in terms of our students being involved in after-school clubs, athletics, and other opportunities to engage positively with our school district and with each other. Additionally, we're going to talk about any changes that we've made on both sides of the budget, the expenditure side and the revenue side, since our last board meeting, which was just last Wednesday. We're going to highlight some of our costs associated with our salaries and benefits. At the last presentation, I indicated that between 70 and 80% of a school district budget is made up of the cost associated with the people that provide the educational programs and services. We're going to detail that a little bit further this evening. Each year over the last several years, we have utilized the transportation reserve, which is monies that have been legally authorized by public vote of the community and vote of our Board of Education, monies that are set aside in a reserve that is dedicated to replacing aging, high mileage, less efficient school buses with newer buses to ensure that our transportation fleet remains safe and efficient. Additionally, we're going to talk a little bit about vehicle replacements that are part of a vehicle replacement schedule for our maintenance and grounds department. We will also talk about something that may be new to our board and our community, which is a recommendation that we look at where we end up at the end of this current fiscal year. And we ask our board and our community to support the approval of a capital reserve. And we'll explain what a capital reserve is, how those monies can help our district taxpayers for any future facilities projects that we might want to do to continue to maintain and repair our facilities. Additionally, we'll talk about some things that we're still looking at between now and the time that we will recommend that the board adopt the budget. And we'll highlight again some of the important dates within the timeline to ensure that the budget is developed appropriately in accordance with all state requirements and that the public has adequate information to learn about the budget, as well as our board election and other propositions that may be on the ballot. Continuing our district highlights, at our last presentation, we talked about some of the accomplishments and recognitions of our faculty and staff. Again, within the last several weeks, we were informed by New York State that Sue Schreck has been identified by the state as a master teacher. Master teacher program is a very competitive program. It not only involves the selection of someone to get an award or to be recognized, but it is also involving the teacher making a commitment to involve themselves in professional development projects with other teachers. It is an intense professional development experience for our teachers, and you have to meet certain criteria to be selected to be a New York State master teacher. So Sue Schreck, who is a grade 5 teacher at Green Meadow, we want to congratulate her for representing our district so well, being selected as a New York State master teacher, reflective of the large number of staff members who receive statewide and local and regional recognition within our district. Additionally, we spoke about the high school graduation rate. Based on last year's graduates, the cohort from last year, our graduation rate increased to 98% of those students attending Columbia High School. We currently, based on those, that cohort of students, have the second highest graduation rate among 80+ school districts in the capital region. So that is a credit to their students, their accomplishments, and all of our faculty and staff, administrators and board, parents and community from the time those children enter kindergarten to the time they cross the graduation stage. The graduation rate is not only a reflection of the exemplary work that is done at Columbia High School, but of the exemplary work that is done across the board at every grade level, district-wide. Our budget reflects an expectation that we continue the academic progress and achievement for all of our students, and that we support the effectiveness and the success of our teachers. It was mentioned this evening by Ms. O'Brien that we've had a number of students who have been recognized in regional competitive art shows. The art teachers will say that we've had more people and more pieces selected this year than any other year, and it's a credit to the talents and the gifts of our students, but it's also a credit to the teachers who bring out the best in creativity in our students, our art department. And it also reflects upon the board's commitment, not only to the core instructional areas of English language arts, math, social studies, and science, but to the arts and the other programs that enrich the children's experiences. Additionally, I'm glad to see as well that our performances have returned. In addition to the Lion King presented by our middle school students last weekend, the Little Women production that I saw at Columbia High School was probably the best performance, maybe even better performance that I've seen north of Broadway. It was fantastic. It was a terrific tribute to the work of the drama teachers, but also the incredible dedication of the students and the support of the parents. Our athletic program, okay, we know we have our athletic director here, Mr. Leonard, who's been honored recently as the Section 2 Athletic Director of the Year. He will also be honored at a dinner coming up in a couple of weeks. Mr. Leonard, working with the leadership he has demonstrated, the support that he has provided to our coaches, his approach to making sure that children in our district are actively engaged, not only on the field, but in the community. We can boast of 44 sectional titles and 6 state championships over the course of several years. Additionally, every year that the New York State Public High School Athletic Association has sponsored a sportsmanship award, our students, our athletic department has received that award. That award is given because of our students' demonstration of outstanding character on our courts and on our fields, but also because of the numerous community service projects that our student athletes are involved in. We have 22 varsity level programs, and each team has maintained an average grade point average of 90 or better. We always, every year, have a number of teams and a number of students that qualify us for the Scholar Athlete Award. So our athletic department is a complement and a support to the academic programs, and Mr. Leonard and his team, they do a terrific job. As we move into the numbers, we want to talk about both sides of the budget. We have the revenue side, which includes state aid, pilot payments, which are payments in lieu of taxes, and we have revenues that we receive through local property taxes based on the tax levy that is established by the board. As of March 16th, we presented revenues estimated at about $106.9 million. We have worked on both sides of the budget, Mrs. Wager and the administrative team, to bring the proposed tax levy, which was about 2.99% at the last meeting. We've reduced that by a total of about $277,690. We have also reviewed the estimates that the state has provided school districts regarding BOCES aid, which is an expense-driven aid. We believe that those numbers across the state were a little inflated, so we adjusted those numbers down about $238,000.9 on the revenue side of the budget, and we made an adjustment to UPK because the UPK funding is based on the number of classes and the number of students that we are serving this year. We'll get the aid next year, and the total aid that we qualify is not the total amount that the state has indicated in the state aid run. It's based on our actual program expenses of the current 2 classes that were contracted with BOCES. So on the revenue side, our revenue is projected at this point at $106,055,249. Again, to highlight some of the changes, we are still working to bring that tax levy increase for next year as close to zero as feasible without laying off any of our employees. And we think we can get there. We're just not there yet. So we brought the tax levy down about $277,000. The current levy at this point stands at $59,847,720, which is about a 2.5% increase, with a lot more work that we need to do on both the expense side and the revenue side of the budget between now and the next meeting. On the expense side, we balance our expenses with our revenues. We are required to have a balanced budget. So our expense projection is lined up with our revenue projection at about $106.9 million. We've made some adjustments. Linda has worked through the final services request process with Questar. We verified student counts, enrollments of programs that we will have students in, such as our CTE program, our P-TECH Early College High School program, the Tech Valley High School program, and other programs and services that our students are currently attending on the program side. And we have also verified expenses that come from other types of services that we receive from BOCES. And there are some further adjustments that we anticipate we may be able to make. So our budget that was presented last time for BOCES services has come down $1.2 million. And I mentioned the formula that is used to determine the contribution level of each district within the BOCES and what we contribute to any increases in the budget. The increases at Questar were very reasonable for next year. However, our share of the increase is going up because our property values, which is part of the formula, are going up at the highest level within Rensselaer County. And that in combination with some other factors is contributing to why our portion of the BOCES budget is increasing. Additionally, we estimate that approximately 2 administrators and 5 teachers will be retiring next year. That is based on letters of intent that have been submitted to the district. We look at the salaries of the retiring employees in comparison to the replacement costs to hire replacements for those individuals who are retiring. And that will yield approximately $396,889 in savings. We shared with the board in January, I believe it was, a list of requests that have come through the administrative team. We are still reviewing those requests. In this particular portion in time of the budget, we have included some additional expenses within the budget that total about $686,000. Some of those expenses may be offset by other areas of the district that we're still looking at for further reductions. So our revised expenditure budget at this point is $106,055,249. Again, the revenue side of the budget is balanced with the expenditure side of the budget. Talking specifically about the additions, I'm going to try to detail these as much as I can at this point based on the information that we have available. We have more students who've been identified by the Committee on Special Education who qualify for and are referred into our life skills classes at Columbia High School. We need to add a teacher in order to be able to provide that program at an estimated expense of $83,390. Each of these expenses, when it comes to salaries, is the total budgeted expense. It's not necessarily just the salary. It's the health insurance, which is more than $20,000 per employee. It's our contribution to the retirement system, which is a percentage of the overall salary, depending on whether the employee is in the teacher retirement system or the employee retirement system. it's FICA, it's all of the other expenses associated with benefits. We've talked in the past about the expansion of the number of children that come to our district who require, by state regulation, English as a new language service. DW stands for district-wide. We don't exactly know where the new position would be assigned yet. It will be based on the schedule of services required. You see that that cost is the same cost projected as the special ed teacher. That is based on an assumption that the teacher would be coming in at a salary at about step 3 and the full cost of the benefits. A 0.2 social studies increase is needed to adjust to the enrollment in the middle school. We have a part-time person who would be adjusted up and an increase of 0.2. Mr. Leonard has asked to provide some assistant coaches to our varsity level teams. One of the advantages of having assistant coaches is to have an extra person in supervision of students, particularly in away contests when we have an injury or we have a problem that needs to be dealt with. We can have one person manage the team, another person respond to the emergency. Additionally, we have tried over the course of the last few years to maintain as many students on the sidelines and as part of our team, be able to manage that process safely and to be able to manage the process that promotes participation. We think in some sports the assistant coaches would be needed. Right now, we've only included 3 among the number of requests, and at this point, we're thinking that we would put an assistant coach in at the varsity field hockey level, the varsity wrestling level, and at boys and girls cross country, with some further determinations to be made. Modified cross country would be a new team and a new offering so that our middle school kids could compete on a separate team. Currently, they are competing with junior varsity and varsity level students. This would give them more opportunity to be competitive, more opportunities to participate, and we think that that cost of $5,000 is a good investment per child. The human resource generalist is a position that would support our director of human resources. Our human resources office has become a very important resource to ensure that we recruit, we hire, and we support the best process we can to hire the best quality people that East Greenbush can hire. Additionally, the office has absorbed other responsibilities, including issues associated with training. Our human resource office also interacts and works with employee difficulties, problems, for example, leave requests, and other things that may not necessarily be visible to the community. It's a very busy office, and despite the increases and the changes that we've made in central administration, we've only maintained 1.5 support positions within that office. So I also provided some additional detail to the board today, and I will also speak to that detail at the next board meeting. The database specialist is a position that was a 10-month position entitled under an old civil service title, but I can't think of the name of the title right now. Linda?
Data entry machine operator.
Data entry machine operator. That position was vacated in October by a retirement. We have one individual in the data and technology office that is doing right now all of the work that he was doing regarding data reporting and compliance with SED, including other issues associated with COVID, where reporting has been required. We left that position vacant, not by design, but because we could not match the duties that are associated with what we need in the office with the old job description and the title. And secondly, we want to convert that position to one that can complement and support the higher level work that Todd Witherall is doing in the data office right now, with moving that position from a 10-month position to a 12-month position. And in a later slide, I will show the difference in the cost. So some of the money associated with this position was left in the budget this year because the position was just vacated this year. We want to increase it to a 12-month position, and it will have greater responsibility. So the total of the positions that have been added amounts to approximately $428,000. Some of the other items are listed on the right side of the slide. Passport for Good is a software program and an application that will help students earn credit for all of the community service and volunteer work that they do. We're thinking about developing a program at the high school that promotes more community service than what we're already doing, and we want to have kids get credit for the work that they do to help the community. Textbook series, U.S. History, World History, and Science. Those are recommendations that came through the Committee of Curriculum Study. We've had a concerted effort over the last several years to align our textbooks and instructional materials with the new standards. In this particular expense, by the next meeting, probably sooner, we will have identified whether or not we can go forward and perhaps purchase these items out of the 2021-22 budget. Then we can remove that expense from the 2022-23 budget. There are some other items that we believe we also might be able to pay for, depending on where our fund balance is projected. And I expect that the board will receive a fund balance projection within the next week to 10 days. And I expect that we will present that fund balance projection at the meeting in April. PowerSchool Cloud Hosting is an upgrade to our current technology. The building furniture and equipment allocation has been adjusted slightly to accommodate some furniture requests. We are still going to engage in a process to inventory what we already have before we buy new furniture. And the Student Finder card equipment is equipment necessary for the students to be able to swipe a card as they get on the bus, and we will know that who is riding the bus, and it will cut down on some of the work that is happening in the transportation department. It will give us an exact electronic report of who's riding the bus every day, instant access to that. There is equipment that is necessary to reissue new cards. We don't anticipate that kindergartners are always going to remember their card, know where their card is. This is equipment that we've been working on this year, but we need the equipment to be able to issue and program the new cards. So all in total, within this particular budget, we are presenting this evening, the total expenses added, new items, are $686,009. To highlight some of the details of the new positions, the salary for the human resource generalist is comparable to some of the confidential clerical employees that currently work in the central office. It is not an administrative certificated position. The salary range would be between $60,000 and $65,000. The expenses, including the contributions to FICA, employee retirement, family insurance, bring the total budgeted cost for that position up to about $100,000. You see, similar with a database specialist, the salary is $71,762, calculating all of the expenses, but we've eliminated the data entry operator, which was a $59,379. So the actual net increase associated with this position for next year is $48,785. And the additional teacher positions, again, we budget for step 3. That doesn't mean we always are able to hire at step 3. We budget for the contributions to the teacher retirement system, and we always budget for family insurance, although as you saw when we reported how we were doing within the federal grants a couple of weeks ago, if someone selects individual insurance or doesn't take the insurance, we broker that savings within the budget. So, but we have to assume expenses at the highest level, and then if we don't incur that expense, well, we wind up saving money within the overall budget. Salaries and benefits of our employees are the highest percentage of our budget at about 77.4%. The number of positions that we have reflect the number of students that we have. We do a staffing projection each year annually. Where we can reduce, we strive to reduce. We are currently looking at positions that may be vacated in areas such as teaching assistants and other areas for adjustments across the district. We want to be able not only to reduce expenses within the general fund budget, but we are slowly reducing the number of expenses within the federal grants that we will not have after 2024. And we're working through that process, in particular with our teaching assistants, because we added many teaching assistants over the last couple of years to assist with COVID, but we aren't going to be able to sustain that level because those federal programs, which currently fund about 17 teaching assistant positions, aren't going to be here in 2 years. So we anticipate moving our teaching assistant total positions down by about 5.2 positions next year, but we haven't made any final determinations as to where those will fall and how those reassignments will occur. The board and the community has supported in past years utilizing our transportation reserve. This year, we are proposing to purchase 8 new buses as part of our transportation replacement schedule. The total cost of those 5 buses, which includes 3 66 passenger buses, 2 wheelchair buses, and 3 35 passenger buses, is $752,468. Those monies are not part of the general fund budget amount. They are monies that have been set aside and voted on by the community to use solely for the purpose of replacing aging buses. When we look at how we utilize our transportation reserve, we look at the mileage on our buses. We also want to make sure that all of our buses are able to be maintained to provide safety. If we find that based on a review of our mechanics, as well as, I don't know that everybody knows, that the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles comes in on a regularly scheduled basis, pulls some of our buses out of the fleet, and does inspections on a regular basis. If we find that the money we're putting into these buses is becoming costly, or if we find that there are any issues regarding potential safety, we strive to try to replace those particular buses. Newer buses are operating more efficiently. We are curious to see what the state will come out with regarding the promotion of the use of electric buses. We don't have any guidance on that yet. Once we receive that, we will take a look at that. The purchase of electric buses does have implications not only for our budget, but it also has implications for decisions that we make regarding the tanks, for example, and the equipment that we put in to be able to provide diesel or gasoline. We have to take a look at how, over time, the use of electric buses, which we support, may change some of the decisions that we might need to make now. And also, we have not heard of any additional funds that the state is going to provide to buy these electric buses. We hope that, I know that that is a conversation occurring in Albany right now. For every dollar we spend out of the reserve to buy a new bus, we get about 68 cents back on the dollar through state transportation aid. That transportation aid goes right back into the reserve to purchase future buses. So it's a cycle. We buy the bus, we receive the state aid, we put it back into the reserve, and then the board makes a determination at the end of each school year. If there's our monies left over in the general fund budget, the board establishes reserves, and one of those reserves and choices that the board can make is to put more money in the transportation reserve, and I believe the board approved an additional allocation to the transportation reserve last year. So the reserve is limited. We have to only maintain that reserve for 15 years or $5 million in total deposits. We have to have voter approval in order to take money out of that reserve to buy the buses. The board can choose to put additional funds in the reserve. 68% of the eligible costs are paid over 5 years. and we avoid the principal and interest that would be associated on the local taxpayers of borrowing the money to buy the bus, because we already have that money set aside in savings, so to speak. Additionally, there are 2 items that were shared with the board regarding replacing a truck that is currently used for plowing and salting. And there was a lawnmower proposal that we asked Mr. Bickle to review to find a smaller lawnmower, less expensive. This is another area that we are looking to purchase possibly out of this year's budget. That would reduce by about $131,000 the budget for next year by taking those items out. We haven't made that determination. Again, we want to look at the fund balance projections. A capital reserve fund, we don't currently have a capital reserve fund, but we have talked about this in the context of all of the facilities work that we are doing now. There's currently a $39.7 million capital project, which continues to occur in the district. We're hoping that that project will be completed over the summer and again into next year. However, as we have engaged in our capital project work, we're recognizing that because we have well-kept buildings, but they are older, there are a lot of expenses associated. And I do anticipate that the next building condition survey will include a number of issues that really are going to be required to be addressed. Plumbing, mechanical, electrical, things that typically are unseen, but need to be addressed in order to have well-functioning, efficient buildings. We're talking about routine things that need to be replaced. For example, electrical systems that might be 20 years old, plumbing, asbestos abatement, things that always are necessary to maintain. So how a capital reserve would work is the board reviews monies that are left over at the end of any given school year. And the board, if you choose, would put out a separate proposition on the vote day for the public to approve and authorize the establishment of a capital reserve. The capital reserve has a term of about 10 years, and the board can choose to fund that capital reserve up to $5 million over the 10-year period. It doesn't mean that we're going to have $5 million at the end of this year to put into the capital reserve. It means over a 10-year period, the board can make a choice to continue to fund that when we have unspent budget up to a maximum of $5 million over a 10-year period. Funding of the reserve requires Board of Education approval. Taking the money out of the reserve requires voter approval. So hypothetically, if we put out a capital project in 2 to 3 years and we have this reserve established, let's say, for example, we have a small capital project of $10 million, the total cost. Our building aid that we qualify for on portions of the project that are eligible for aid is about 72%. If you just take, for an example, $10 million proposed project, 72% of that project is going to be reimbursed over a 15-year period. So we would receive $7.2 million back from the state over a 15-year period. The board could choose to take the $2.8 million that otherwise would be billed into the school district budget with principal and interest payments over the period of that project and take the money out of the capital reserve, pay that $2.8 million, and the taxpayers pay $0. Now, in the past, we have done capital projects and timed them so that debt was coming off the district budget as new debt was coming on. This is different than that. This is an actual $0 if the board had enough money to be able to allocate towards the local share. It can also be used simply to lower the local share portion of the project. And we think, as we've looked at our audits over the course of the last few years, we've been able to maintain our actual expenditures below our budget. In difficult times, we have still been able to maintain appropriate reserves. And in terms of the stability of the district and saving local taxpayers, we think that this capital reserve makes a lot of sense. And I'm going to ask Linda to help me with anything I may have missed or didn't explain very well.
Thank you, Mr. Simons. I think you explained it very well. It really is, it works very similar to our reserve for buses. So if we have money to put in there at the end of the year, the board can decide to fund that reserve that way. We can build that up, not to exceed $5 million, but we can build it up. It can get to $3 million. Let's use that as an example. And if we have a project in place, we can use either all or part of that money. So it really does avoid the cost of borrowing money.
So what question, Linda? So in a proposition situation where it's a capital project filed for voter approval, would there also at the same time have to be a capital reserve fund expenditure approval from the voters too, separate? So the potential is that could be voted down.
Well,
right? It's a separate approval process, right?
It is a separate approval
Okay.
process. It doesn't have to be done at the same time. It would be part of planning the next capital project.
Okay.
So that if we estimated an amount that would be in there, we would pull that money out at different times over a few different years as the project went on. It could be used all at once in 1 year, or it could be used over several years.
The board
we-
can always choose, let's say the proposition passed.
Yep.
But the board can always choose to revisit the proposition, lower the total cost of the proposition to offset the fact that the capital reserve use was not approved.
Sure.
So,
And would there be a potential of using it for other purposes? I mean, I'm looking at the list here. It says machinery, apparatus.
Well, that would be machinery that is included in a capital project.
Like-
It has to be part of a capital project. So HVAC equipment, I can't think of it. This is the,
technology that might be involved
yeah,
if you're upgrading an infrastructure for technology and there was equipment associated with that. Depending on what that technology was, you could utilize that. It depends on whether it was considered to be an approved project, part of the approved project from SED.
So instead of taking on the additional debt to pay that piece or coming out of the general fund, we would use the reserve to really offset that.
that's correct. And in addition to principal and interest on debt, there is an expense to us issuing debt. We work with capital markets, our fiscal advisors, but that's pretty expensive when we actually go out to bond.
So part of the process of developing the capital project would be to determine not only the overall scope of the project, but whether or not the board was going to use all or part of the capital reserve. And then you project out over a 15-year period, because school reconstruction is reimbursed over a 15-year period, what the local taxpayer cost would be in the annual budget over that 15-year period. And then you try to offset that by determining what level of the capital reserve you might want to use. For example, you might not want to use all of the capital reserve.
Sure.
You're also going to want to look at your other reserves and your fund balance picture at that time to know whether or not you would be able to potentially make further contributions to that reserve.
Thank you.
One more consideration also is that funding that reserve, that can be done by board approval. It would be the interest or any investment earnings on that money would also go back into that reserve. And we can even elect to put, as we do transportation aid in the bus reserve, some building aid in the capital reserve.
Oh,
The transportation reserve is a form of a capital reserve.
sure.
So between now and our next meeting, we should receive the final state budget, which we're anticipating would include at least the amount of state aid that we're projected to receive. We are continuing to look at our grade level sections, as well as other areas of the district. We anticipate that some teachers will move from one building to another this year because we have lower enrollments in some grade levels. We've informed our administrators of some of those changes that may occur. We've talked to the teachers union about it. Our class sizes in some of our kindergarten, first and second grades are lower than typically average, what we've had. And at Red Mill, for example, we anticipate that the kindergarten will be very high. And so we're going to need to add sections there. So rather than hire additional teachers, we're going to be making some shifts. We looked at our class size guidelines. We discussed how those shifts could be made to make sure that the class sizes were as equitable as possible. And 2 of the elementary school vacancies from retirement will be filled by 2 people that would be shifted from the federal funds, those early intervention specialists. And we will continue that process as more positions become available. So at this point, we are recommending moving forward and continuing to develop the budget to get our tax levy increase down as much as we can. We will be recommending the use of the transportation reserve. We will recommend establishing the capital reserve, and we will have 3 board member seats up for election on May 17th. So here we are on March 23rd. We have board candidate petitions, so reminders to incumbents who may be considering running again. Those petitions are due back to the district office by March 28th. We're going to have a discussion of this date this evening because there's another event that some of the board members and administrators may want to attend on April 13th. So we may change that date for the proposed budget adoption. The deadline for board petitions is April 18th. Excuse me, this is when they're available, March 28th, April 18th. You still have time. And I misspoke. I didn't make everybody nervous. And we'll have a public hearing, an official public hearing on the budget on May 4th. And we invite all of the community to come out and vote for our budget on Tuesday, May 17th. And I'll take any questions, concerns, or ideas the board would like us to explore.
Okay, board members, opportunity to ask questions at all? Anything that,
So when you said you expect to try to get that down to 0%.
As close as I can.
As close, right, to 0, right? Got it.
I always say that. I think
Um,
we'll be able to do that, but we want to make sure that we can do that with a level of assurances that we can meet the expense side of the budget. One of the factors would be state aid. If state aid comes in lower or higher, that has an overall impact on our levy.
I mean, but hopefully based on what our guest speaker
Donald?
last
Yeah,
meeting.
John McDonald?
Yeah, John McDonald, saying that this was one of the best years, budget wise and stuff for education. So, I really would like to, get as close to that 0 as possible.
I think we will. I'm 90% sure we will.
So Jeff, thank you for the presentation. It was very good.
Yeah,
I am in support of the capital. I
Oh, you're
think,
muted, yeah.
I think that's very important.
Can't hear Michelle, Peter.
Michelle, we're having trouble hearing you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
We cannot hear you.
Can't hear a word you're saying.
No.
Mute, unmute, no?
No.
Looks like you're okay.
Yeah, can she type it in the chat?
That's odd.
No, I'm sorry, we can't hear you, Michelle. You want to put something in the chat?
If you want to put something in the chat, somebody with better
Or you can-
eyes than
You
me.
can text
Can
it to
read
me.
While we're waiting, when we've been reviewing all of this information, the fact that the class sizes are lower than typical is a good thing when we can afford it, because we still have our children making progress and recovering from the year that the pandemic impacted us the most. So if we were in a financial crunch, and just to be transparent, we could reduce the number of elementary positions by 4 at least and stay within our class size goals. However, we are not able to do that through attrition. We have some very good people. So there's 2 reasons why we want to have a budget that supports lower class sizes than maybe typical. One, better student contact time, more support for the kids at the early primary levels. We've seen the data on how the kids are progressing through the work that we're doing with early intervention. Secondly, the only way that we could reduce those people would be to lay them off, and we don't want to do that because we're not forced to do that by financial circumstances. But when you actually look at the numbers, we could reduce by 4, but we would have class sizes that were larger, and we would have good people leave us. That doesn't mean that as things get better and financial circumstances get tighter, that we wouldn't look to achieve efficiencies through attrition. And we do. We just did not have a lot of retirements this year. I think everybody wants to wait who's eligible for retirement until we're into a normal cycle of school, which is great because we have excellent people.
John?
Okay. Can somebody read the chat?
The chat says, thank you for the presentation. I am echoing the comments from Mark, and I am sure we will. Also like the idea of the capital reserve. Think it sets us up well for the future.
Thank you, Michelle. We're going to do our best between now and either April 13th, 12th, or 14th to bring this down. Right? And I think we can do it. Linda and I have really been pushing. And maybe I've been pushing more on Linda.
John, you had a
And
comment?
she's been responsive. Jennifer?
Jennifer?
Yeah, I just had a question. So if we were to vote to start the capital reserve, which I agree with Michelle is a good idea, in some crazy world, if we did not have capital projects, what would happen to those monies? Would they, after a certain amount of time, be released back into the general budget?
That's a great question.
Yeah, so if over 10 years we don't have a capital project, which I
Would be
don't
highly
see
unusual,
happening,
I
but
know.
however, what happens is at the end of the 10 years, it can be used to pay down some debt, but it can also be used to go back into the general fund and reduce the levy.
Okay. And then if we use, let's say, 50% of that capital reserve, and then we had a remaining balance, and after the 10 years, those contingencies would still be on the balance?
Well, we could do that, or we could open a new capital reserve and transfer the balance to the new reserve and move forward on another 10 years.
Which we do in transportation, we do that.
Yeah.
John?
Thank you for the thorough presentation. Just a couple of comments. We focus on the zero a lot, and I'm a supporter of that, being that we want to make our district as attractive and as affordable for people that we can. But I also have a concern when we focus on a zero exclusively. Maintaining the programming, and when we fixate on meeting a budget line, we need to remind ourselves why we're here and what we're doing and how we're servicing people. And I think you did a good job of reminding us of that. And the reason I say that is because the people most affected by budget cuts are the marginalized student population. They're the folks that we're really working in overtime to serve. The kids in the middle don't fall into the gaps because they have a lot of things going for them other than us. And as we go through this budget process, I don't want to lose sight of that and at least speak to it publicly. When we look at the increases that we have had over the last 2 years with inflation and budget things that we cannot control, being salaries and costs to do business, it's probably went up at least on the low end 6% over the last 2 years. We've had no budget increase over the last 2 years, or at least proposing that. So with that being said, in my position, if you have to keep a little bit to move us forward and continue to service the students in the way that our goals and objectives meet, I really think that we as a board need to look at that as well. And again, I don't want anybody to think I'm encouraging going out and spending money, but as we go through this process, I think it's really important that we focus and really explain our positions to the public and what is driving us to get there. So again, I think the path that you're on is bringing us to that point. But I just wanted to have that conversation because I really am concerned in this state of the world and where things are going about the marginalized students in our population.
Thank you. There were some conversations yesterday in Albany advocating for more dedicated money for mental health services for students. So we may see some monies that come dedicated from the state for mental health, which I know has been an important priority of our board for many years, but in particular as after the pandemic. The other thing I wanted to just comment on the tax levy and the tax rates. One of the things that has benefited taxpayers of our school district, last year the board chose to keep the levy the same as the previous year with a 0% tax increase, but everybody's tax bills went down. Tax rates went down in every municipality. That's because the tax levy was spread over a larger property tax base. That trend of the property tax base is continuing. So, and I'm not saying we're not going to get to zero, but even a small tax levy increase on the part of the board could potentially yield tax rates going down again because our property values are growing so well. Is that correct, Linda?
That's correct.
So one of the things you worry about down the road is you want to continue to say, well, you have the resources and can maintain programs. We can keep the tax levy low. Maybe it's a zero again this year. But at some point, the local revenue will need to be collected to offset expenses. And we just don't want to see our taxpayers experience a year-to-year spike, even if it was a small tax levy increase. So we just, in the way that we talk about this, need to make sure that when we can do it, we're going to do it, but it can't be done every year without hurting programs. And a lot of it is predicated on what we get from the state.
Well, it's interesting that I wasn't going to go into that, but that's where I was driving, is that if we continue to produce such low tax rates, at some point in time, it will bottom out and we'll have to spike because of things that are not under our control. And I would rather have a gradual increase that is more affordable and steady than to be presented with a 5 or a 6 that shocks people in that respect. And I that's where I was kind of going with it, is I'd rather give a little bit each time rather than have to take a big bite out of that apple and try to cover the whole thing. And that is my same philosophy with the capital reserve, is I think it is very prudent to be very mindful of our spending, which I think we are. You guys do a great job, but I also am a very good supporter of savings and being mindful of savings. Again, we must remember that it is the people's money that we are spending, as well as our own. I don't like my tax rate at this point either.
Any other questions?
Just a comment, one of the things we'd look at too is that, or potentially we could afford a $3 million increase in the budget. It's about 3%, right, Jeff?
Yes.
Without having to go to the taxpayers for more money, because increases in aid hopefully come through. But also we're talking about being able to fund a substantial amount into a capital reserve.
That's right.
So
That's right.
we're not cutting the budget per se. We're increasing the budget. We're just maintaining the tax levy at a rate that reflects, to me, this year anyway, the fact that we've seen some substantial increases in aid that will help us quite a bit.
That's right.
We've been very prudent in the past with our reserves and our general fund reserves to make sure that we're prudent. And I do agree with John that long-range planning to make sure that we don't have those spikes and we manage our reserves carefully will help to manage those increases over time, because really it's not just the district that's facing the cost increases, it's also
Right.
the taxpayers with fuel and
That's right.
food and those kinds of things. So our taxes are pretty high already. We just don't want to push them to a point in the next year or so that
Right.
is going to be detrimental to the taxpayer as well. So I think it's a strong budget. I appreciate the fact that we can still work on it some more. I did ask for the detail. I hope we get that in a couple weeks.
We expect it before a couple of weeks.
Okay.
Linda and I touched base today. We think we'll be able to get the fund balance projection,
Okay.
the line item budget documents,
Okay.
and what was the third thing? There was a third thing.
No, that's it.
The final, what we believe the final.
I asked for two. I don't know what the third one.
The final expenditure, proposed expenditures would
Sure,
be
sure, understood.
by the 4th.
Okay.
Of April.
Right. So
Okay.
what we'll do is that line item
I know there
detail,
was a third thing, Linda, but I can't think. of it.
well, that line item detail will come along with whatever adjustments are made
Yep.
to get to that, whatever the adjusted
Sure.
budget will be.
Okay.
And I think an important part of that is the fund balance projection, so that we can look at possibly funding the bus reserves, possibly making some purchases this year. One of the things that I did want to mention also is that additional savings that we'll see this year is that we had items in the budget this year that we were able to charge off to the federal grants. So that is producing a savings in our general fund this year.
Thanks, Jeff.